This is the More to Life Than Money podcast. Real people, real stories, real conversations about wealth and abundance with your host, J.W. Rayhans.
Welcome, everybody. Here we are at another episode of the More to Life Than Money podcast. And today, you are in for an absolute treat. We have the co-founder and operating partner of one of the best and well-known barbecue joints in all of Arizona. And not only that, but he's just an outstanding leader. His fingerprint is all over his community. He's done some incredible things that hasn't come without challenges. And also, one of the things that you'll notice about him is he has the ability to make people laugh, even sometimes just through a look that he gives you, just makes you smile. So if you want to learn about life, if you want to learn about the ways of wealth, and you want to do it in just a logical process sort of way that works over time and just through the lessons of someone who's lived it, then lock in and let's go. Tad, it is such a joy to have you here this morning and really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have together.
Well, thank you. I'm always humbled, at this age when somebody actually wants to hear what I have to say. So thank you for the invite. It's my pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome. I can already tell that we're going to have fun. Even just what was happening before we even started recording, I think we're going to have some fun today. And so if you're listening to this might be one of those episodes where you just take a moment to really soak it in, to really kind of digest what you and I are going to visit about, because I think there's going to be some great lessons in here that any of us can apply. Might even accelerate some success, but it also might help some people navigate some challenges that they might be facing. And so, Tad, there's a lot of different ways that people think of you. And some of it's by title. You're a co-founder, you're an owner, you're an operator, you've led, you've been on boards, you've even been a trustee. There's lots of different titles that people have given you. But I got to tell you, man, there's just some great qualities that I've seen in you. And it's things like what I mentioned even in the intro. It's the way that you treat people. It's the care that you put in. I mean, you've been able to be a positive influence in thousands of people's lives at some of the most influential time of their lives, especially when it comes to young adults, especially those that you employ through the barbecue, and your other concepts as well. But there's also this side of you that's extremely family oriented. Any of you listening, if you ever want to get Tad excited, just ask him about his family.
Oh, yeah.
See, even just look at the smile that comes on his face right now. And I hope you're watching this on video instead of just listening it to audio. And if you're not, go back and watch the video, because that's where you're going to gain some additional insight, even from Tad, because, man, just his presence has a feel to it. And so, Tad, I got to start with one question. And everything that you've experienced in life, it doesn't just come. It doesn't just happen. So how in the world are you here right now?
Well, I am here because God has providentially led me from the places I was to the places that I am and the places that I will go. And along the way, I have benefited from learning from others. And so that's one of the reasons I agree to do podcasts like this, is I love to share, not because what I have to say is so great, but because there might be, in our 30-minute conversation, there may be one nugget that somebody takes and they might remember it for a while, they might act on it, and they might not even remember where they heard it or where they saw it, but it becomes important, and that would be great. And so I'm here because I think I'm here because of relationships. It's taken me a long time. I'm 62. I know I look older, but
I was going to say that maybe you were about to say that you look younger than that. People might be shocked that you're 62. I thought that's what you were going to say.
Very few people would agree. But no, it does take time to figure out that while you do need to work hard, and it is important to be educated, and all of these other things are important, and to plan and to be organized, it's really about relationships. And so another reason I agreed to sit at this table and do this podcast is you're very intentional about relationships. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think in particular, I know it sounds odd, but I think women tend to have more relationships, more friendships in their lives than men do. And so I didn't want to be in that category of being an older guy with no relationships, no friends, no contacts. And so I appreciate the fact how intentional you are about reaching out and see how I'm doing. And that's very important. And most of the friends in my life, the relationships that I have, that's what keeps me going.
Yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning each of those. I'm going to highlight a couple things that you just shared, because if for any of you that are listening, I hope that you're catching on. There's a place that you started, Tad, that I don't even think you realize you started with that question, which was, it came from a place of humility. You came from a place of, I'm not sure what's going to resonate. I'm not sure what's going to make an impact. I'm not sure if people are even going to remember some of the things that I shared. But the hope is somebody's going to learn something, somebody's going to hear something, somebody's going to take an action on something that has a positive impact in their life, or that they can use in some way in what they're experiencing. But it's almost as if right off the bat, you're like, I don't need the credit. I'm just here because I want to make a difference. I want to have that kind of impact. And then you moved right on to relationships, which is where that starts. And sometimes a relationship can even be just something that someone hears, or they hear it in just the right moment. And so I want to back up just a little bit in something that you mentioned in terms of, this path, if you will, that you've been on. And you mentioned it being God ordained, of where you've been, where you are, what's happened in between. Let's start with, if you think back, okay, there was a younger version of you that wasn't 62, wasn't there?
Oh, yes.
We all have that version. What are some things?
Much better looking, I might add.
Was he? Yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I've seen some pictures of you. So you've had, by the way, this is where we can have fun together, but you've been through some transformations. I don't just mean in the way that you look, but you've been through some major transformations in life. And I hope that we're going to have the trust to be able to dig into those a little bit too, because I think those are extremely valuable for people as well. When you think back, what is something that's been very formative in your life when you think of that younger version of yourself? What's been very formative? What's a story, an example that you can share of just a formative moment?
I had a few. I thought that I wanted to be in corporate America for most of my life. And so I spent 17 years with American Airlines, and I had an absolutely wonderful flight, and wouldn't change a thing. I went in when I was very young. There was this allure to that industry. It was there was some glamour about it, and the luster wears off very quickly when you're actually in the industry and you deal with travel and travel delays and unruly customers. But I loved the time that I had there, and I met people along the way who helped me. So in other words, I was very late to the party in terms of education, and I'm a huge proponent of lifetime education. I was on the accelerated 11-year undergraduate program, and so it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do in terms of degree, in terms of career. And so here I was working for American Airlines, trying to figure things out, but people came along who helped. And I had somebody who American Airlines was not kind enough to pay for my first master's, but they were kind enough to carve out the time. And I had a boss who saw in me the ability to get all of my work done and make the department look good, and yet go and get a master's at that particular one, TCU, at Texas Christian. And that was formative. I mean, just to see somebody who understood that at the time, that was not common. Nobody worked from home. Nobody had a flexible work. I mean, we all wore coats and ties 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And it was a very different time in corporate America. And so I had somebody who was kind enough to say, well, I'm going to invest in this person because they're going to help the company. And that worked out well for American, and it worked out well for me. Yeah. So just finding somebody who will pour into you, and mentor you and foster your professional relationship, very important. Doesn't happen all the time. Particularly, I mean, let's talk about remote work.
Yeah.
Who is, coming alongside folks who work at home 3 to 5 days a week, even hybrid, and really fostering their careers? I hope it's happening at some level.
Well, and even you mentioned the word intentional, probably even more in the workplace now. We need that intentionality from leaders or managers or just people that see something in someone else that they are willing to pour into them. There has to be great intention because you're right. We're not always side by side physically anymore, but we can be side by side kind of virtually, and we can be noticing what's happening in people's lives. And there's something that you mentioned too, when you were talking about this formative moment, and when you look back was, the initial industry you went into or the initial corporate America you went into wasn't as glamorous as you thought it was going to be. And I think that's common. I think many of us, we have this picture of what the profession's going to be like that we go into, especially early on, or there's been a picture that's maybe been formulated for us. And now in the world of social media, it's probably been glamorized in a way to make it seem easier or faster or accelerated to the path of success than maybe what it turns out to be. And so even in that is a way that you're pouring into others that might be in that moment right now, where maybe they have gone into an area, they've gone into a profession, they've gone into a job, and they're like, wait, this is different than what I thought it was going to be. This is not as glamorous. It's not as easy. It's not as hyped as I thought it was going to be. But where can I find someone that's willing to see some things in me? How can I really deliver the greatest value that I can, but also attach myself to someone who I think is in a spot that I want to be in the future? And it sounds like you had someone like that at American Airlines that said, you know what, look, this isn't going to be common, but Tad, I see something in you and I want to invest in that. You're going to have to do the work, but I will give you the time necessary to make it happen. And then that led to your first master's with TCU. By the way, I hope all of you caught that, 11-year undergraduate accelerated path.
Yeah.
Sometimes things don't always happen on our timeline that we originally planned for. And so, so what did you do with that? Okay. So you're at that moment, and where are you at life-wise at that time? So are you and Christy already married at that time? Are there any kids, or kind of take us to where you're at? What does life look like when you're kind of going to TCU, you're getting that master's, you're working this corporate job? Paint that picture for us.
So within the space of 3 years, I went from working at headquarters with American Airlines to accepting a job in Charlotte, North Carolina. We couldn't sell our home, so I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. Christy was living in Fort Worth.
Wow.
During this time period, we had a child. I moved back from Charlotte. We sold our house. I finished my undergraduate degree. And one of the courses that I took had us do a self-assessment.
Okay.
And, maybe 50 questions. And it was like, has this happened in your life? Has this happened in your life? Yes, yes, yes. And he held mine up and he said, you should really be dead. The amount, the number
That's
of
motivating.
the number of stressors you've had in your life, in the last year. I'm like, well, it's okay. Because I actually found that, especially then, and I've had this happen multiple times throughout my life, when you're at your busiest, you're kind of forced to be at your best. You're forced to be the most organized. You're forced to make the best use of your time. And so, I was juggling corporate America and now a baby and a move and a career move, because I moved, after we moved back from Charlotte, I went to something that I hadn't been in before. And it was, but it's great because that crucible, if you will, really does forge the path ahead, and you just figure it out because you have no choice in the matter. So
that's right. You have to.
You have to. You have no choice. And I think, to backtrack a little bit in your conversation to the folks who go into a career and don't find it to meet their expectations, I think that's the norm. I really do. And I think people need to go in with their eyes wide open that the odds are that what you saw on social media is not reality.
Yeah.
And
it's the highlight reel. Maybe.
Absolutely. And I do get asked by, this generation for some advice sometimes. And one of the things I recommend is that they stay off social media altogether. And no one wants to hear that in today's age. They not only do they not want to stay off social media, they want to be an influencer. And I just think that whole path is so dangerous because you're looking at people who are 2 or 3 years older than you who are flying on private jets. They have no business flying on private jets. And if you aspire to that, you're likely going to be in debt. You're going to make bad decisions. So I really do think certainly you need to be find that middle ground on social media, or try and not use it at all and see if your life maybe improves.
Yeah. How can it be utilized to empower you rather than, give you a view that's not reality?
Sure.
There's a couple of things that I'd love for us to touch on. And so I'm going to use some kind of current buzzwords because I think you and I can unpack these a little bit.
Well, you can explain them to me.
What's that? You can. Well, we'll see. I was hoping maybe you could explain them to us,
we'll
right?
See.
But for all of you, stay in on this, because here's what's going to happen is you're going to get a reality perspective of what really is kind of the pathways towards success, impactful success, not that short-term success, but really sustainable. And that's what I've seen in your life, Tad, is that longer-term sustainable success. It doesn't mean it's always that way. It doesn't mean every day is a championship. What it means is that there's like this progression, there's this learning that takes place along the way, and that's allowing you to experience some of these great, meaningful things in life. And so one of those buzzwords right now, one of the words that gets thrown around a lot is resilience. And what does resilience really mean? What allows someone to kind of build the strength that's required for resilience? That's what I was thinking of when you were sharing kind of that 3-year phase of life. I mean, you're really talking about a time period where, you've got an instructor that looks at it and goes, man, you should be dead. That's a lot of major life things that have happened in a short amount of time. And how'd you do it is kind of what the instructor is going is, this doesn't make any sense. I see the assessment. I see you sitting right in front of me, but this doesn't make sense. So how are you doing it? But what's happening, as you even mentioned, is sometimes when you're busy, it forces you to be at your best, because what happens is you kind of have to lock in and get focused on what are the most important things to do with my time in this moment, because I don't have any time to waste. I don't have any extra time. And so you kind of get dialed into what's really going to allow me to achieve the things that I want to achieve in this moment. I mean, you're talking about a time period, you and your wife are living in 2 completely different places. You've got a newborn baby, you're pursuing a degree, you're trying to build a career in advance, you're trying to sell a house. That's a lot of stuff. And so resilience, there almost has to be challenge. I wouldn't say almost. There has to be challenge in order to strengthen someone's resilience. You don't have resilience when everything's great.
I think when I hear resilience, I think of the notion that you're going to stretch but not break. And that stretching can usually be a very good thing. And it's how you handle it. Yeah. And, you could put that in an entirely different world where you work out at the gym and, there's so much stretching that's needed, but you don't want to go so far, especially at my age, and injure yourself. And so same is true in life. And you do want to stretch yourself. You do want to do things that perhaps don't sound comfortable. They're out of your comfort zone. Yeah. And yet it's how you deal with, and you will have adversity.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no,
that's part of life.
Despite what the reel says, that's part of life. And so it's how you deal with those things that makes you a resilient person, because you're not going to do it once. You're going to be stretched multiple times in your life, and it's how you bounce back.
There you go. Write that down. Stretching but not breaking. That's resilience. When you stretch yourself, because there's satisfaction when you've been stretched, when you've done something that maybe wasn't within your capacity before. That's where you grow. And that growth creates some satisfaction. That growth allows you to believe that there's still more for you to be able to do, even in any area of your life. And so the next area that I want to touch on is one you mentioned about being an influencer. Okay. Lots of people want to be an influencer. And now that word carries a lot of different meanings. If it's a social media context, it probably means you have a lot of followers, or quote followers. Are they really following you or not? Right. Or are they just watching your stuff? Sure. But are they doing anything with what you're putting out there? So I want to talk about this of being an influencer, because my belief is there are many people, Tad, that would look at you and they would say you're an influencer. They would say that you've either influenced their life or influenced the lives of people that they know. So when you and I talk about being an influencer, it seems to have a different meaning than, say, a social media influencer. What would you say if you were giving some advice and you said, look, if you really want to be influential, if you really want to be an influencer, here's at least some of the things that I've done in my life or things I've focused on in my life that have allowed me to have some influence with people. Sometimes even in moments I didn't realize I was having any influence at all. What would you say has led you to be an influencer?
Well, if we agree with the notion that I am an influencer, which is a bit humbling in and of itself, I would say, your circle of influence is, you don't always know what it is, but if you are intentional about, I enjoy, for instance, mentoring. Yeah. And I went back and I did some more coursework in mentoring, because if we can impact, in particular, the next generation, I think it's incredibly impactful.
Absolutely.
And so, there was a term some years ago of subject matter expert. Well, not everyone's going to be a subject matter expert in everything, but if you can be expert in your own field in those few things and then share that with others, your circle of influence, you only need to be meeting with regularly a smallish circle to have an impact on a larger circle. And so just be intentional about the fact that you want to pour into people. And I've needed to recognize, I need to say yes more often than perhaps I have time to. I need to stretch myself to make those coffees happen. Where we sit down and we spend an hour and we talk through things that don't even seem particularly weighty, but they're important. And if you can help somebody through a crisis in their home, if you can help somebody through a job move, they have some options in front of them, and you want to give them the opportunity to think it through in a way that makes sense for them and their family, and whether they should move or they should take this promotion or they should do this. The influence can come with that, and it is a little humbling. But if you need to take it seriously and you need to say yes on occasion.
Yeah, there you go. And that's gives us another framework to write down. When it comes to being an influencer or being influencing to others, you mentioned start with a smaller circle. Start with a small circle that's within the areas that you've experienced, that's within the areas that you have expertise, that's within the areas of what life has brought to you as opportunities to learn, stretch, grow. And start with that smaller circle, because if you can influence that smaller circle, they're going to carry that influence out indirectly. In fact,
That's exactly what I intended to say.
Well, you know what? You just reminded me, even in what you were talking about there, you just reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from Martin Luther King Jr., where he basically says, what affects one directly affects all indirectly. Think about that for a moment in what you just shared of what it really means to be an influencer. It's that you allow yourself to focus on those deeper relationships, those one-on-one interactions, those maybe it's just within the scope of the people you directly know, but you're intentional about the relationship you build with them to where they come to you in those moments to ask you those sorts of questions. Tad, what would I do in this moment? How would you handle this? What was it like when you went through something similar? Guess what happens? Then they start to ripple that out.
Sure. And
the impact grows, the influence grows. So for those of you that you have this desire to be influential, think through, what is it that you've experienced? What is it that you could really bring to a small group of people? And then just know and just have the faith to say, that will go somewhere else. You don't need to know where all it's going, but it will go somewhere else.
Quite true.
Yeah, thanks for walking through that, because I think sometimes, and granted, I can have a tendency to do this too. Big goals, big dreams, big impact. And sometimes we just need to be reminded that those big things happen with small efforts. Those big things happen with small, consistent efforts, and sometimes in the right areas. You mentioned saying yes. What are the areas that you're going to say yes to, that you're going to say yes in? And then that means that you're saying no somewhere else. That's okay. Let's talk a little bit about this transition, because we talked about the barbecue at the beginning. And I'm sure there's some people that as soon as I mention that, they're like, tell us more about the barbecue. I can share with you. So I'm gonna get a little bit personal. There was a time period in my life where I had to go through some surgeries. I had to be face down for a while. And then the recovery from that meant that I had to have a very restricted physical activity compared to what I was used to, which basically meant I was allowed to go on walks. And for me, that was a challenge to just go on a walk. Tad, I don't even remember if I've ever shared this with you, but where I would go on that walk would be at about 4:30 in the morning. And I'd walk through downtown Gilbert, and I'd never thought I'd be hungry for barbecue at 4 or 4:30 in the morning. But man, walking behind your restaurant or by your restaurant with those smokers,
isn't
I'd
the
want barbecue for breakfast, man. So I know there's going to be some people that want to hear about the barbecue, and the barbecue has been a great success. It started in 1997. You guys are, at the moment that we're recording this, you're like 28 years in. You're going to be coming up on a 30th anniversary. That's tough, especially in the restaurant business, but really in any business. To go 30 years, it's only a small percentage of companies. It's only a small percentage of entrepreneurs that ever get to experience that. But you didn't just automatically become a business owner one day. As you mentioned, you started with American Airlines. You started down the path of corporate. What happened? Like what changed that all of a sudden in 1997 you're going, yeah, let's try this business thing?
Yep. Good question. And I've really only had 3 careers or 3 jobs.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about those.
Since I was 14.
Okay.
So when I was 14, I went in the restaurant business. And I had a wonderful time working at a place that no longer exists over in Scottsdale, and got to know the restaurant business and knew that I enjoyed it. Went away to school. In fact, while I was in Tucson at U of A, I waited tables at the airport. And at the airport, people would come in, and probably 90% of our customers really were grumpy and they weren't fun to be around.
Gotcha.
The exception was the folks in the airline industry. It was really interesting. They were kind, they were outgoing, they loved that, they wanted to talk about their job, they wanted to talk about travel. And I was like, well, that's intriguing.
Yeah.
And so I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do in my life. So I started applying to the airlines and I got hired. And so I nearly went with America West. America West had just become a thing in 1984, but I ended up going with American. So my second career was born, and I spent 17 years there. And then in late 1997, I got a phone call from my brother Tim and Joe. And they wanted to talk about this concept that they had for downtown Gilbert. I knew very little about Gilbert. I grew up in Scottsdale, went away to school in Tucson, literally knew nothing about Gilbert, you know. And so that was new to me. I needed to fly in and see what it was about. It was a very different town in 1997.
Oh, it sure was.
Than it is now. And all good, but very different. And so got the phone call, and it certainly was not an easy decision or a quick decision, but it was a decision made with much prayer and consultation with Christy, and had the opportunity to come in as a partner in a new concept called Joe's Rural Barbecue in this wonderful 1929 building downtown Gilbert. And it worked out wonderfully. And we have, over the years, in 2006, we then opened Joe's Farm Grill out at Agritopia, in the home that Joe grew up in. And since then, we've opened Topo, Arizona, downtown Gilbert as well. So in each case, it was an opportunity that was presented to us that you go in with your eyes wide open, but you truly don't know what you're going to, I went from corporate America to washing dishes, literally, overnight, and 80-hour weeks and bloody hands and getting home at 3 a.m. and wondering if it will be a success and wondering if it will be profitable and all of those things. But that's what entrepreneurs do.
It is.
And so it began to pay dividends very quickly. And not, when I say dividends, it wasn't just that it was a financial success. It was that I had a great business partnership. I wouldn't change our the makeup of our team at all for any reason. We have a wonderful leadership team. We have great management teams at all the places. And it has worked out so well because I grew up in Scottsdale, and of course we had our favorite restaurants, and there was a restaurant I worked at. But having a restaurant that's part of the community and ingrained in the community, and almost, I don't necessarily like to use this term, but it's iconic.
It is.
Okay, and Joe's Rural Barbecue.
It's okay to use that term. It is.
Has become iconic. And if you think about that, what does that mean? That means that people when their guests come in from out of town, where are we going to take them? They take them to Joe's Real Barbecue. They take them to Joe's Farm Grill. And that's incredibly humbling. And so we always, I mean, that's why the bar is so high at our places, is we need to be up to that challenge of being an iconic place.
Yeah.
And
Tad, I got to pause you right here
Sure.
because there are a lot of things. And just, by the way, if you're listening to this, I'd say rewind this thing and listen to the last like 3 minutes over and over, because what you did, you chunked a ton of great advice in just that run right there of you go in eyes wide open. You don't know entirely what you're getting into. It's something completely different in a new area that you're not familiar with. And your brother and this guy, Joe, call you up and they're like, Tad, we got this new concept in Gilbert and we want you to be a part of it. And you're like, okay. And then it's 80-hour weeks. You're getting bloody. You're cleaning dishes. You're figuring it out. You're working hard. You're probably working as hard or harder than you ever have before that, probably for maybe even less pay. And yet then you go to talk about the dividends from that. And right away you're like, I'm not just talking about financial dividends. I'm talking about the dividends in my life, the dividends in what I learned, the dividends in what we experience, the dividends in building a business that's truly ingrained in the community, and how that's different, how that's unique to really build a business that's ingrained into the community. And so for when you're listening to this, write those things down. Practice those things, because what you shared with us, those are some nuggets to what can truly help someone maybe experience those bigger dreams or those bigger goals that they have in life. And you don't always see it in those moments that you just talked about. And it absolutely is okay to call Joe's Real Barbecue iconic in Gilbert, because it is. And it is a place that people think of to go to. And you guys have been very purposeful about that along the way. And so when we talk about, I want to go down this path of what does being involved in your community really look like? And I want to start it this way, Tad. I'm just going to start by asking you, why do you serve in the way that you do? And if you don't mind, I'm going to highlight just a couple of things that you've been involved in, because I do believe it's important for people to hear that, of some of the things that you've done that go beyond your business, that go beyond Joe's Real Barbecue. But they're ways that you've served. They're ways that your fingerprint is throughout this community, not just from Joe's Real Barbecue, but even in being a co-founder of a nonprofit, Gilbert Talks, being involved in several different nonprofits around the community, being involved with the town itself on some of their committees when it comes to like the Economic Development Committee. So not to necessarily talk about those specifically, let me just ask you, why do you do that? Why do you serve in your community?
I truly view myself as a servant.
Okay.
First off.
Yep.
And if I can back up to the conversation, the part of the conversation where we're talking about the entrepreneurial spirit and starting a new place, there's a big difference between being an entrepreneur who wants to open a new restaurant. Most entrepreneurs want to open a concept such that it's replicable, and they can then turn it into 10 units and 100 units and then sell, and then never work again. Okay. They want the big payday.
Sure.
And we're not wired that way, at all. And so we were very intentional about building places that are sustainable in and of themselves. They're large enough that they can, for instance, allow us to give medical and dental and long-term disability and short-term disability and all these other wonderful things that if you're an entrepreneur who's only intent on creating 40 restaurant units so that you can sell that, it looks different, and you don't offer 401k and all of these other things. And so we were pretty intentional about building large enough units, single units, that could sustain themselves over time and allow us to do all those cool things for our folks.
Yeah. Your view was different. Your view and your approach was different.
It was.
Yeah. Yeah. And that really does make a difference, if you will. Briefly, there's a couple different ways that I'm actually going to bring us to a close in our conversation. We're going to touch on each one of these. So let's start with people. because one of the things that you do really well, and your leadership team does, even when you talk about your brother Tim and Joe and that leadership team and the way that you select managers, the way that you treat the people in your organizations, in the restaurant business, I would say most people probably understand your team members, your employees aren't necessarily going to be with you forever.
Right.
It could be a transitional job. It could be one of their first jobs. You guys have had people who have stayed with you very long periods of time, significantly longer than the average in the restaurant business. Why do they stay?
Wow, this is my day to be humbled. And I might even get a little teary-eyed because in a week or so, I'm going to address a group about retention, okay, in our restaurants. And so I've done some very recent work to get numbers and so forth, and to understand, I'd like to think I have my finger on the pulse of the restaurant industry, being in it literally every day of my life. But to really look at numbers, you would find in our industry, in the restaurant industry, it's very common to have 80% turnover in a year. Wow. Okay. And some fast food places higher than that.
By the way, in case all you caught that was 80. 80% turnover in the first year is the norm
in our industry.
Okay.
And so if I was going to go stand in front of a crowd and talk about my retention, I really needed to know where I'm at.
Yeah.
And so I was a little humbled. I pulled January through June, and we're at 11%. And so 11%.
That's incredible.
It is.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. But it's not me.
This is what leads to, like, why do they stay, right?
Yeah, they stay because we've been very intentional about making that place a good place to work, making the grill a good place to work, making Topo a good place to work. And, when you open, you don't know if you can afford anything. And I'm putting on my, 27-year-ago hat, but you don't know. Are we really going to offer medical, insurance right off the bat? Yeah, we are. And so you keep looking for things that you can do to up the ante. And 401k was a very big deal to us, because most of your benefits, particularly in our industry, if you're going to offer any benefits at all, they're offered to your full-time employees.
Sure.
We wanted something that applied to part-timers as well.
Okay.
And so that's really been the biggest eye-opening blessing to me, is to look back and see people who came to us when they were 16, and they worked for us for maybe 5 years, okay, and then went away, went to do this in school or moved here, and yet they took with them, their 401k plus the match, and they've got that, and they were 21 years old when they rolled that over into their IRA, and they're going to have a little nest egg, and that's because we had the forethought to make that happen. So that's a very humbling thing, but I'm glad you see it, because that's the beauty of keeping people around. When you go to Joe's World Barbecue today, your cashier is in her 28th year.
It's incredible.
My kitchen manager was put on payroll before we put ourselves on payroll. Okay? Wow. He literally started drawing a paycheck in 1997, and he's still there. And he's still a very integral part of the team. And so it's cool that people see that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, on the one hand, it's so incredible to walk into we also have original employees at the grill. And it's so wonderful to walk into those places and see people who've been there that long, who enjoy their pay and their benefits and their teammates, really. I mean, it's all about who they work with and who they work for.
Absolutely.
And they enjoy who they work with. And then I eat out a great deal. And the other side of that coin is to go someplace, and I'm a regular at a lot of places, okay? But there are so few faces that are familiar when you go in, because the turnover, the churn and burn in our industry is so high. Yeah. So it's been very humbling, but it's we love what we do. We love the tools that we use and are able to pour into their lives, and it's had an impact, and thank you for pointing it out.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. It really is something special. And whether you are a business owner, whether you're working within a corporation, whether you're at home with your kids on a regular basis, the reality is that the environment you create around you is what you're talking about. the environment that you create for the people that you care about. Are you intentional? Are you purposeful? Are you looking beyond just the time that you might have together? And is that what's formulating the environment that you're creating? And so for anyone, what you've just shared is extremely applicable in any setting, because we have the opportunity to create that. We have the opportunity to decide how are we going to treat people, regardless of what the day looks like, regardless of what's happening around us, regardless of the things that are out of our control. We get to decide how we're going to treat the people around us. And you guys have done that very, very well. I want to lead us into finishing our conversation with this. And I'm going to ask you this in a certain way. It's a question we ask on this podcast every single time we visit with someone, because the response is insightful, because the response comes from you. It comes from your experience. It comes from the life that you've created. It comes from what's been happening. And it's this. If someone was sitting with you and they just point blank asked you, Tad, what is wealth and abundance mean to you? Or like, how would you define wealth and abundance? What would you tell them? What would you tell that person sitting there just going, what is it? What's wealth and abundance?
I would think about my response longer than I'm thinking about it now, because it's just not no, it's okay. It's just not you use that term frequently in terms of what you do. I don't. Right. And I in fact, I shudder a little bit when I start talking about wealth, okay? But we all do what we do because we need to get paid, and we all use our monies to do some things.
Yes, we do.
And so, to some extent, we're all wealthy. It's a matter of how we choose to use our resources. But when I hear about wealth and abundance, I'm just immediately thrown into this framework where I'm thinking about, I go back a few years. Okay. And what would I have done differently in terms of money and so forth to make my today look different or my tomorrow look different? And so I don't, the whole wealth, the whole how much money do I have is just so irrelevant to me. But it's about what can you do for others. And so if I had it to do again, I would not have student debt. Okay. There's a reason it took me 11 years to get my undergraduate program. I had no money. And so I did borrow some money, and I really wish that my life circumstances had been different. And so I would encourage those who are in school or thinking about going to school or thinking about getting another degree or wondering whether they should go into a trade and go to a trade school instead of a university or a junior college, community college. But to the extent that I could have avoided debt early, I think it would have made things look different. I did get some great guidance along the way about debt avoidance. And so, wealth to me, that word just to me means I don't need to struggle through the daily. And so and that I have something to help others with.
Great.
And so, no one told me early in my life that if I spent less than I made and saved the difference for a very long time, there could be wealth in my future. No one told me that. That was very late in life. No one impressed upon me how important it was to avoid debt. And then you can get into some nitty gritty. You can get into, I should have bought more insurance when I was younger. Okay. I should have loaded up on some insurance products and not just term life insurance when I was younger, when it was very affordable, because an old guy like me doesn't get insurance at this age. And so long-term care insurance, or maybe even long-term care insurance for your parents. I've now gone through that cycle of life where we had my folks and their situation and their elder years, and had there been long-term care insurance thought about either by me or them at any stage, it would have been helpful. And so those are the types of things that as I look back, I wish people had been able to pour into me and let me know earlier that those things were available and I should think about them when I'm young.
Thank you for sharing some of those specifics too, because again, this might be a part where you rewind that, or somebody listening to this rewinds that and goes, I want to learn from this. And Tad, you've done well. You've done very well. And so even just here's some things that I would have done when I was younger, that's going to help someone. That's going to help someone today when they listen to this. And so thank you for sharing some of those specifics of like, here's some examples. Here's some things I wish people would have said to me. I wish someone would have let me know that, hey, if you spend less than you make and you save that and you do that over a period of time, there's going to be positive results. There can be great results down the road. But you also shared at the very beginning of that really we all are wealthy. It's a matter of what we do with our resources. And that, I think, is something that we want to leave an impression with for anyone that is listening to our conversation today is we all have wealth. We all have resources. It's a matter of what are we doing with those resources and where can I find some guidance for some of that, whether it's earlier on or later on, but where can I get some guidance for that? And depending on what you want to accomplish, my hope is that in our conversation today, I got to tell you, I hope that people apply some of the things that you've been talking about. I really hope that they take that, they listen to it, and they go, here's where I can apply it in my life. It may not be exactly the same way that Tad did it. It might not be exactly the same way that we talked about it, but I can see the application. I can see where in my world, this would really make a difference. And Tad, I feel like we could keep talking for many different topics,
sure,
but also a longer period of time. And that might happen. We might have to do this again sometime in the future because there's so much more that I feel like we could have unpacked. And at the same time, I want to make sure we give it to everyone and give it to you in a way that you will take it, you'll use it, and then really share it with others. And that's my hope too, for any of you that are listening. If you relate to Tad's story, if you connect with it, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with other people that you think it could have a positive influence on. And Tad, thank you for even using some of the words that you've used in terms of intentionality, relationships, really focusing on the people around you, putting effort into the small things because they can turn into great things, allowing your influence to ripple itself out because of the way that you have just great relationships, contribution, conversations with one another, and way you go about creating a place in your community that people want to be. It has been such a joy to be with you. And so thank you so much for visiting with me this morning.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it too.
Oh, man, this has been great. And as all of you know, there's more to life than money. Come see us next time.
Come back for our next episode of the More to Life Than Money podcast. Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA, SIPC. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity.